You're listening to RevOps FM with Justin Norris. Today we're joined by Kimi Corrigan. She's led marketing ops teams for companies like Duo Security, Cisco, Wiz, Expel, and most recently, DataRobot, where she is currently Vice President of Marketing Operations and Strategy. And we don't often see VP level marketing ops roles, and this is a position Kimi's actually held a few times. So we'll get into what does it look like to lead a MOPS team at that scale? What does it mean to have both ops and strategy in your mandate? I think that's another really interesting topic. MOPS at small companies versus, 90,000 person behemoths like Cisco, and a whole lot more. Kimi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to speak to you. And actually, even before we get into it, you are one of those people, we've spoken a few times now, but I think I've known you for 10 years without really knowing you super well, like from swimming in the small Marketo pond that we've both been in. I'm curious, what was your entry point into that universe?
Because I've been in it for so long. I was in it from when it wasn't marketing operations. It was just marketing automation. So the abbreviated version was, I was just a marketing coordinator at a company a long time ago. And my boss at the time taught me how to run a Salesforce report, very simple Salesforce report. And it just kind of blew my mind of okay, so we have this system with all these people and I could just query it in this certain way. And that opened up my brain to just operational systems in general. And at the time, we had Silverpop as a marketing automation tool. So he said, we don't really have anyone owning the system. Do you want to kind of try to figure it out? So I did. I dived into that. And then we merged with a competitor who had Marketo. So we had to do a little bit of a bake-off of should we keep Silverpop or should we keep Marketo? Luckily, we landed on Marketo. So from there, it was just making the moves of our data and processes from Silverpop to Marketo. So that was an interesting experience. And then from there, I just started learning about other companies who were trying to do the same thing. So I moved to another company who had Silverpop and wanted to move to a new, more modern tool called Marketo. So they said, hey, it seems like you've done this before. Do you want to come do it for us? And that was the first time I decided to take a role that was all marketing automation. It was a much bigger company than the one I had come from. And I had that moment of do I really want to specialize in this one really tiny specific thing that feels like career suicide? But it was a company that was everyone wanted to work there. It's a local place in Cleveland that had slides and the diner and the on-site daycare. It was the Google-esque experience. I was well, whatever. I just want to get into that company and then I'll go figure out what I'm going to do there. And then many years later, here I am still in this world. And now it's a whole different world. But yeah, like most of us, no one wanted to do something and I said I would do it. And then it led to this incredible career so far.
I'm curious. I remember during my very first marketing automation evaluation was looking at players like Silverpop or Manticore, or software that doesn't exist anymore. What was Silverpop like? I never actually used it. This is random and probably irrelevant to most people, but I'm just curious what an early generation marketing automation platform was like.
All I really remember was the email capability of it. And that's no shade to Silverpop. I'm sure it had much more functionality at the time that I just didn't even have the brain power to understand. I don't know what the lead processing power was or any of the operational stuff at the time. It was just an email automation system for us. And that was still a very impressive use case to utilize at a company, as well as to learn and be able to own, I'm the person that knows how to do this behind the scenes. That was very impressive at the time. Which looking back now, that says how long I've been in the game here. But now I always am just hey, marketing operations is not email marketing because it still has that stigma, I think. But back then, that stigma was something to be proud of. So that's all I really remember about the platform because it was so long ago. But I remember at the time being I am so technical. This is incredible.
I know exactly what you mean. Maybe we'll have a longtime Silverpop user in the audience who will write in and educate us.
And I do remember going to one Silverpop user group type conference experience. It was in a very small ballroom somewhere and just being I'm on the forefront of marketing technology. This is incredible.
So that vibe, I know exactly what you mean. And I think for the first 5 years of my career in Marketo, it was oh, you're Marketo. And if you're a Marketo champion, that was a really big deal. You know how to use it. Nothing cooler than that. And not to say that it's not cool or not an achievement today, but I think back then it had a certain cachet and a certain like, whoa, you really know how to do this dark art that other people don't understand, just like what you said. And then I feel that marketing operations has changed, like you mentioned, but it still has its roots in that pedigree. Sometimes I feel that's a liability. Do you feel that in terms of being able to expand beyond it? Like it can be limiting.
It can be, but also I'm the first one to be like, marketing operations is not email marketing, but email marketing is still marketing operations. Like I still have people on my team that are fully responsible for building and sending emails and making sure the lists are right and making sure we're executing correctly. So I'm also careful not to like poo-poo it too much because it's like, it's still right in the middle of my responsibilities of what my team is charged with. So I think there's just different ways to look at it. So I try to not get too big for my britches when it's like, where did we come from? Because it's still part of our to-dos every single day.
Mine too. And that is a good point. So when you think about that scope conversation, like someone new joins your team, what's the mission statement that you give them about like, this is what MOPS does at DataRobot or whatever company you happen to be at?
Yeah, at the simplest, there's a couple ways to describe it. In some ways, like I've had my kid, he's older now, so he can understand a little bit more. But when he was younger, when I would try to explain what I do, I'm like, I put together puzzles all day with a bunch of missing pieces. That's one way of describing it. But when someone's joining my team, like really our charter is like to make everyone's job easier and make the output better. My team should be making everyone's job easier. Maybe they don't feel that way as they're learning the processes and partnering with us at first. And their output should be better because we're involved. Because we see everything. We're involved in every area of marketing and cross-functionally. We are involved in strategy. We're involved in creativity. We're involved in tactical, operational data and reporting. Like there's just no limit to what marketing ops could or should be involved in my opinion. So joining my team is like, be open and be ready because who knows where this adventure is going to take us.
I think that's an elegant definition. One of the reasons why I often focus on like definitions in my own role in these conversations that I have is because it comes back to like, what does great look like? Like, how do you know when you're doing a good job? Like sellers know they're doing a good job if they hit their quota. Marketers, if they hit their pipeline target, whatever. And for us, it's kind of like the work is never done. How do you tell if you're doing a good job or if your team is doing a good job?
I can tell my team is doing a good job because they keep showing up and wanting to be a part of it. Because I think as ops people, regardless of which spectrum of an ops role you fall in, if you're not having fun and you're not feeling accomplished and not feeling like you're being effective, you're likely going to move on or check out because the work is so varied. The work is so challenging sometimes, even just like the communication and getting people to understand complicated things in layman's terms for their role. Like if you don't feel effective pretty consistently, like you will burn out. Like I don't think ops people generally burn out from like workload or amount of work coming in. It's feeling ineffective on a regular basis that burns us out. So I think my team is doing a good job, or I know they're doing a job when they're engaged, when they're excited about the work, when they're able to get all the work done because our processes have become effective and the way we work across teams and organizations has become effective. So that's not a KPI of are we having fun? Check yes or no, but that's how I try to keep a pulse on how my team's doing. Because if they're feeling effective, that means what we're trying to do across all of these different areas is working generally.
It's not as strange of a KPI as it might seem on the surface about having fun. I think at least if you're wired the right way, because I know for me, like fun at work is exactly like what you said, like things are working. It's a well-oiled machine. It's like that yes feeling. That's a pretty good indicator that you have like a healthy systems around you.
And, we don't have full control, like putting out a fire with campaign ops today because we have forms down in Japan and we don't really know why. And there's some field not hitting the midpoint and it's not fun every day. But, if he's partnering with the right people internally to help resolve this and everyone's jiving and understanding what to do and how we're going to solve this problem and we have a path to get to the end of it, that is fun. I mean, I don't want our forums to be down anywhere, but things are always going to go wrong. And like my favorite moments in the history with all of the wonderful people that have been on my team are when those crises of systems or data or something came crashing down and we rallied and like worked through it and had a good sense of humor about it and trusted each other. Like those are my favorite memories of my career so far, of like when we just kind of pulled together and got through Marketo being down or a form crashing or something that we did ourselves to inflict pain. But then we're like, that's okay. We can fix it. We just need an hour and some grace from our BDR team and we can fix this. Those are my favorite moments because they're always going to come.
I've really been thinking a lot about this exact thing lately. And the problems themselves are never actually what stresses me out at work. If everybody is aligned and just like you described, and then there's situations where it's like there's a problem, but then there's a second order problem, which is like the people surrounding the problem. And whether it's politics or misunderstanding or like, oh no, like you have to manage fallout internally, that is not fun, at least for me.
That is not fun.
And what do you do? Is it luck of the draw? Do you do things as a leader to forge those connections, to build that trust? Like I don't have that fully figured out yet myself.
I've been at my new company for the past 6 months. So, I'm just getting through that first period of time, getting to know everyone cross-functionally and how things work. And I'm still trying to uncover a few areas. And I've had to really lean in on this area more than I have before, just because all companies are different, they're organized differently. RACI charts are different at every organization, especially when it comes to system ownership. So this has like probably been my biggest challenge over the last 6 months of like, you really need to push yourself to figure out how to navigate getting what you know needs to be done prioritized when it's outside of your control. And actually, you have less than 50% of the control maybe, and these other teams hold more control than you. And that can be initially very frustrating for operators who have had such autonomy and other experiences. But then just taking a deep breath and being like, okay, well, this is the learning I'm doing at this experience, at this stop on my journey of my career of maybe instead of learning some really interesting operational system use case over the past 6 months, I'm learning how to work more effectively in situations where I have less control over the outcome of my systems and processes than I'm used to having. And it took me a few months to like open my mind to that of like, okay, this is what's happening now. And this is what you have to figure out. So for me, I'm navigating that right now. So I don't have any super strong advice, but for me, it's just been being more patient, talking to my cross-functional partners more face-to-face on Zoom or whatever, and just trying to understand their point of view. Even if I still don't think the point of view is the long-term solution for the organization and how we want to operate, that doesn't mean I can't try to sit patiently and understand it so that when I try to suggest change, they understand where I'm coming from versus me coming in and saying, actually, this is how we're going to do it because this is how we should be doing it. It's like, well, I still think my suggestion is good, but maybe I don't get to point A directly. Maybe I have to make 3 stops on phases along the way and be more patient. So I'm just trying to spend more time with people, be more understanding. And then that comes with a new set of experiences for me as in my career of I now have to figure out how to communicate to my manager how to reset expectations, even though the reason I'm resetting expectations are outside of my control without just saying, well, it's because they won't do it quickly or because it's not a priority for them, because that's not fair or productive. So it's figuring out how do I navigate that communication and reprioritization, even though it's not what I want to be doing. And at the end of the day, remember, and I remind my team of this often, is there are plenty of people doing this every day, but it's not us. We're not saving lives. No one is going to die today because we don't get this ticket closed. So let's just take a deep breath and figure out what can we do to still feel effective in moments of feeling ineffective. It's probably something smaller, more insulated to our team or within a marketing team. Can we lean in and help in a different area just to get that effectiveness feeling and keep the fun vibes up as we talked about? So it's a lot of just reconfiguring week to week, month to month as we navigate like how to work differently than we expected to work.
I think what you described is maybe one of the biggest things. I've certainly experienced it too, that kind of hits you upside the head as you move more into a leadership role, where initially you're like, I'm solving problems in systems or in process. Or if you're a consultant, people are coming to you and the problem's already defined. And you're like, just fill this hole with a solution, which is very satisfying. And all of a sudden you're in a scenario where like alignment is the problem and navigating people is the problem and like trust and relationships.
Like now looking back 6 months ago, these people didn't know me from a stranger. So I'm coming in hot. Like we got a new go-to-market strategy. We got new systems. We got new processes. Let's go. We're here. And they were kind of like, wait, hold on a second.
Right.
And I found that very frustrating just because I wanted to feel effective. I wanted to come in and provide value. And that's how I tried to spend my first 6 months. And then I had to reconfigure my expectations of how am I going to add value to this organization overall? And how am I going to add value to my team day to day when they aren't able to move as fast as they thought they were going to be able to move? It's been a completely different experience than I expected to have coming in, but also super valuable. I'm learning a lot, and I do feel like I'm leveling up my communication in the role that I'm in.
For what it's worth, it sounds like you have a super healthy perspective on it. And like,
I'm trying, not every day. You know?
I feel you, but it's like when that bulb goes on and you're like, oh, wait a second, like this is the learning right now. I should stop fighting this. Actually, this is the thing that I need to do. Yeah. That feels like the unlock moment I've noticed as well.
I have to show up every day. I want to keep getting the paycheck every time it comes in. Like I still want to feel good and valuable here. So like, what other choice do I have? I can just keep fighting it and being like, stomp my feet. I'm like, well, we could be doing this other thing, but it's just like, okay, but we're not. So what am I going to do about it? Am I going to be upset? I don't want to be upset. I'm generally a pretty positive, happy, like, let's just have fun. Let's do some good work kind of person. So you just have to find a different way to like get that value for yourself and your team, as well as providing value for the organization besides frustration.
So it seems to me that what you've described there in a lot of ways is people wonder, like, what does it mean to be like a director or a VP? And a lot of it is not like you're like learning more about systems, like you're dealing with this sort of thing.
A lot of negotiation, a lot of politics. I don't mean that with a negative way, but it's a skill set that you have to hone through situations. You can't take a class, you can't read a Harvard Business Review and be like, okay, now I know how to negotiate and reprioritize through these situations. I just trying to be grateful for the experience, and I am. And yeah, I'm learning and trying to encourage everyone else to do the same.
Should be documentation. We need a knowledge base. So coming back to this notion of like the VP marketing ops, like if we're being candid, there aren't that many of those positions out there. I probably know like a dozen VPs of marketing ops. You don't see a lot coming up on job boards, and it does worry me a bit for people that are marketing operators that don't necessarily want to go a RevOps path or go back into marketing. Are you in a career cul-de-sac? Like, not that being an executive is the be all and end all for everybody, but for those that want to. Any thoughts on this? Like how you've gotten into this role or what you see in terms of this role being rare?
I think you just have to ask for it. I've been a VP of marketing ops twice, and both those situations came up through kind of like a back channel introduction. Typically a new CMO at an organization is trying to figure out how they're going to come in and affect change quickly. And I got introduced to those people and said, here's what I think I can do. Here's the kind of team I want to build. And here's a job description that I would like to align to. And I make sure that I put vice president marketing ops on that job description. It's still rare, but I think we have to start asking for it, especially if you're going into like a casual conversation about joining, especially like a mid to late stage startup. That's a good place to try to get that job title, because they're just looking for someone who knows what they're doing, who can be very effective very quickly, and who can probably recruit a few people that will help them be very effective very quickly. So I think that's a good place to ask for that title. But, you know, if you're in an organization and you're a director or a senior director and there's not an immediate path to VP of marketing ops, I think ask, what would a VP of marketing ops have to do to earn that job title? Because I think a lot of times senior marketing ops people end up being a real right hand to the CMO. They almost end up as like a shadow chief of staff plus marketing operations. And I think if you're in that position and you're feeling like you're doing a dual role of leading a marketing ops team, both tactically and strategically, as well as almost being that chief of staff type role, good time to ask for the title or ask, what would it take to have a vice president of marketing operations here? That's when we'll start seeing more of them, is just kind of pushing that. Like we see VP of RevOps all the time. And I think that's because people asked for that title at some point in the history, and then it became a standard. Yeah, we need a vice president of revenue operations, of course. Like what sales leader wouldn't have one? So I think we just need to start asking for it. Maybe that's an oversimplification of the answer, but
so, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it actually.
Yeah.
But and so you anticipated, I think, my next question, which is it just a name between a director or senior director or a VP, or? And it sounds like if your allusion to like sort of that chief of staff role, maybe let's spell it. Like, what does that mean for people that maybe haven't had that experience of partnering with a marketing leader?
I think you have to figure out how can you, even in your MOPS role, start to truly understand the full scope of all of the other marketing functions. Almost, can you learn enough about product, corporate, demand, especially, of course, which is a natural relationship for ops? Can you learn enough about those functions to the point where if your CMO was going on sabbatical or there was a gap in a CMO, that you could interim that role. And I think if you feel like you could, or at least 60, 70, 80% could, then you're heading in the right direction of asking for that job title. That doesn't mean you have to be an expert in those areas, but you should be competent across the full spectrum of marketing, as well as partnering with revenue operations and understanding the sales side of things much better than most marketing functions do. I think that's where you can gain a lot of confidence in earning that title pretty easily.
Let's say I am like a mid-level marketing ops manager, but I want to start to position myself in that way, but I don't have that relationship today with the marketing leader. How can I start to build that? Like, what could somebody do to start to like gain that trust?
Especially if you can just get some time with them, whether it's, once a month or whatever, just like, hey, what things are you unable to solve, whether it's because of bandwidth or resources, or you just don't know how to solve it? Because at the end of the day, operations people in my mind are just problem solvers of like, give me as much information as you have available, which could be a little, or it could be a lot, or you could only have a couple of the pieces, and I will try to solve the full problem for you. So I think it's trying to find out what those things are, whether it's directly from a marketing leader or through just your observations and coming up with some solutions or suggestions. Like, it doesn't have to be the end all be all solution, but if you see a gap in a process that marketing is doing internally, that has nothing to do with marketing operations traditionally, but like if you see a gap in how they are managing, partnering through procurement, right? Like marketing spends a lot of money in a lot of different ways with a lot of vendors. And that can be an overwhelming process for so many people that spend dollars in marketing to navigate. Can be tough for finance because they're dealing with so many different stakeholders trying to spend dollars. If you see a process like that where you're like, I think I could kind of just map this out in a Lucid chart, and I could look for areas of efficiency, and I could do some really good documentation on this. I'm not saying to loan out all your time without being compensated for it, but if you see something like that and say like, hey, I'd love to take a pass at something like that just to see if we can find some efficiencies and find some wins for everyone involved in this process, like look for some of those and go after them. I think that helps show the value of like marketing operations isn't just Marketo and Salesforce and Six Sense. It's truly like overall operational efficiency and excellence. And you have the mind for it. It's just applying it a different way.
Coming back to your point about like we're more than just systems, and also that we are very systems rooted and oriented in many cases, depending on how we enter the field. Is there a role to think more like about performance or about the actual marketing strategy? Like, hey, like I'm seeing this sort of shift in how people are going to market. Like we should be thinking about this, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I have one on my team. He's the best. And I think it's a super valuable role. I typically call that role analytics and strategy or data and strategy at whatever level your organization will support. Like I love a director type level role in that. And yes, that person should be very well versed in just like reporting, analytics, hopefully maybe even dabbling in the technical side of like being able to like build out Tableau dashboards and stuff, like all of that basic stuff. But like for me, the most valuable part of that role is someone who can look at both like our data and trends and help people figure out how to take action off of it, not just read the results. But also that role is always looking out with like what's going on. Like what are people talking about on LinkedIn? What are people talking about at these conferences? What are the go-to-market strategies? Where are the trends when it comes to technology? Like, do we need to go all in on platform play, or do we need to do like this piecemeal? Like we're going to do these 6 tiny tools, and that's going to be a better way for us to build up our strategy around them versus letting like a giant platform drive our strategy. So I'm lucky to have someone in that role who I think is excellent at it. So if anyone out there is listening and wants to learn more about that person's day-to-day specifically, I would be happy to make an introduction. But I think that role is a key component of a marketing operations team.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think turning to the notion of operations and strategy, because you have 2 buckets in your title, that strategy piece is often missing. So I'm curious, like, what does it mean for you to have both of those things in your title?
It means I have to have really good boundaries, as does anyone that has strategy in your title, because there's no doubt you're still very tactical. You're very much in systems or data or whatever processes day to day. And you have to set aside time for the strategy, whether that's blocking time on your calendar or knowing how to make that shift in one meeting to come in and say, I'm going to talk to you about performance last month. And then at the end of the meeting, I'm going to talk to you about qualified buying groups and why that strategy might be what's best for us. Like you have to be able to do both. And it's really hard to not get bogged down by the tactical piece of it, right? Because it feels good to cross things off a list and the list never stops growing. But the more you can hold that boundary on strategy being part of your day every day or your week every week, the more optimized your to-do list of tactical things becomes. Like then you're working on the right things, even if they are tactical. It's because you're driving strategy to improve overall efficiency of, whatever it is, go to market or procurement or whatever process. Like you have to hold space for that strategy, both whether it's setting aside 20 minutes every day to scroll LinkedIn and read all the hot takes or read ebooks, listen to podcasts. Like if you feel like you have strategy, or if you have strategy in your job title and you don't feel all that strategic, ultimately that's a you problem to solve. That comes with like navigating priorities with your manager and your team and expectations of what bandwidth is, et cetera. But like you have to find a way to hold time and space for it.
Maybe let's dig into the word strategy a little bit, because it's kind of like lead or campaign, where it can mean so many different things to so many different people. What does it mean to you in terms of like where you should focus?
The simplest way to think about strategy for me and my team is just like, are we thinking about how to do things better all the time? Like we can design a really great process and it works great for 6 months, but that doesn't mean it should just ride forever. Even just like our intake form for our ticketing system for marketing operations, we shouldn't set it and forget it for 3 years. Are we thinking about the experience people are having, even asking us to do work for them? Like, are we constantly following up on one specific thing and then not optimizing the intake process for it? So it's just constantly thinking about how can we do this better? And better could mean a lot of things. It could be more efficient. It could be an easier user experience. It could be better conversion rates. It's just how can we improve the thing that we're thinking about and that we're doing and that is up and running. So that's when I think about strategy of like, are we strategic? And it's like, yeah, because we are constantly like thinking about how can we do this better and then executing on it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, okay, let's think about a new way to strategize on this.
So would it be the strategy of the marketing ops team? Like we're going to be strategic in how we're executing our operations, or the strategy of the marketing team?
Both. So meta. Strategy is so meta for marketing ops. Not only do we have to be strategic about how we work and how people work with us, we also need to think about strategy on behalf of all the marketing teams that are our customers. And we do that in a lot of ways. Like, for example, like campaign operations, going back to email marketing is the bread and butter of where we came from to get here. I have worked with all kinds of campaign operations people, both internal, external. I've had people that they want to come in. They don't really want to talk to anyone. They don't want to do anything. They want to look at their ticket queue. They want to build, execute, test, send, schedule. Amazing. What a skill set.
You need that.
I also have someone like my campaign ops leader now does all that, but is also very integrated into the strategy of everything that, like anything that comes into his queue, it's not the first time he's heard about it because he's been in the strategy meetings. He's helped people think about things differently. He knows what's coming. He's helping strategize on how we're going to do, a trial nurture program and like, let's trigger off of these data points, et cetera. So you can go any direction with that. And I think both are welcome. It's just, I like the way that my campaign ops person works now because it does make other teams more strategic and hopefully teaching them, okay, we need to think about this thing differently. It's not we do these 5 things. It's, we know 2 of the things we really want to do. So let's talk about what the other 3 things could be. Like, what is the wild, wild world of possibilities? And then we can talk to the campaign ops person to say, what is possible? And instead of him saying, these 2 are possible, this one isn't, it's these 2 are possible, this one isn't, but I have 6 other ideas for you to think about. So I think we're responsible for our strategy as well as lending it to everyone else.
I love that. And it's funny, kind of ironic that as you climb the ladder of marketing operations, it actually does lead you back to marketing. Because when I look at like where I do most of my learning, and there's tons of great RevOps and MOPS podcasts, I do listen to them, but most of my time is actually spent on like marketing podcasts and books or go to market or like bringing in those ideas, like you mentioned, to like feed back into the business. Like, hey, are we thinking about this? And it's just kind of funny that it takes you full circle back to the thing itself.
It's always back. Thinking about like being a VP of marketing ops. And I've been that for a few years now. And I've had a few people reach out, I think with good intent of hey, like, aren't you ready to move on? Like, why aren't you going for your first BMO role or just VP of marketing role at a startup? I get the impression they're kind of like, move on. And I'm just like, you have no idea what marketing operations truly is and what it can be. Like, I feel like we're still scratching the surface of it. So I find it slightly insulting, even though I know that's not what they mean. I'm still learning every day. I'm not bored. I love where I sit. I love seeing so much of the organization and so much of what we're doing. I think it's endless still, or at least it seems like a wide open road that will take me to the end of my career, hopefully. So not saying never, but I still have a lot to learn here in marketing operations.
I think that's inspiring. Do you ever either feel concerned about or tempted by the prospect of like revenue operations, of expanding into those other fields, or you feel like actually it's a different field?
Yeah, I just don't think it's for me. I love partnering with those teams. I like marketing ops sitting in marketing and not under rev ops. I just think that makes more sense to me. I know it works well for some organizations of people, and I think that's great too. But yeah, it's just, there's something about it that just doesn't appeal to me in the same way. I sit in on some like forecasting and planning and pipeline meetings, and I'm dangerous enough to understand what's going on. But the thought of like just thinking about pipeline and forecasting and like that piece of it just isn't as appealing to me. I'm glad it appeals to someone else. I'm happy to just be their partner in it.
Marketing is its own thing. And, you know, the more I think about it, I was thinking about this a lot lately. So it's funny that just the timing of this conversation, like sales, it's very hard. Like I don't envy sellers carrying a quota.
I support them. They have all my love and support. BDRs more than anyone. Like, you know, what can I get for you? I'm here for you. But like the thought of even just sitting in a revenue organization that is so hitting that number and the stress of that, they clearly get some sort of enjoyment out of it, especially if you're good at it, and like kudos, but like I couldn't do it. It reminds me of like the same reason I haven't fully gone into like the consulting route. Like there's just some risk aversion that I cannot quite jump over of like, I like having someone say, here's your health insurance and here's how you do this. And we're going to make sure your taxes get paid. Like there's some aversion that reminds me of like consulting and sales of like, I'm just like, nope, I'm good. I'm going to stay right over here.
And yet marketing in a lot of ways, it's very ambiguous. It's very, especially like if we think about like brand and, you know, we get away from like the directly linear performance marketing model. You're doing things that are kind of important, but you can't fully measure them and you can't fully, like there's this art really to it.
Definitely an art to the science. Yes. And I'm just trying to figure out like how to turn that art into something measurable. Like we're rolling out Hockey Stack right now. We're not going to use it as like an attribution based on an attribution category, but that's not what appealed to us about it. It's more of like really understanding that full journey that people go on and then how to optimize it, you know, pulling this lever or tweaking this. So even though it's an art, sort of a dark magic, I'm still trying to figure out how to measure all of it.
Not a thread I plan to pull on, but since you mentioned it, is Hockey Stack really where it's at? Because I've had their CRO Amir on the show before. They look really cool. They look like they're really innovating beyond, you know, a lot of other players in the category.
I do get that impression. I mean, that's what sold us on it. I think what we saw was really impressive, and it looks like it's going to solve what we're trying to solve currently. The team's very impressive, and you can tell they're really trying to make this a big disruptor, and some of the things on the roadmap that they've shared with us seem like other gaps that we want to fill if those things become real and tangible to us. So we're fans and we're going to see how it goes. We're only a few weeks into our implementation, but we're very excited about it.
Really sweet. It's a natural segue into talking a bit more about tech stack. And you alluded to some of the questions that ops folks need to ask themselves right now around, do I commit to a big platform? Do I go composable? Am I still going to be using Marketo or HubSpot or whatever first-gen marketing automation platform on? Am I still going to be using that in 3 years? Those are big questions. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I'm taking a different approach this time around than I have in the past. I'm not anti-platforms in general. Like we purchased Marketo a few months ago. We're launching in a few weeks. You know, we're on Salesforce. But when we think about the other things I would typically put on the list of like, we need to get a EBM platform in here, we need to do this, I am approaching it differently this time of like, I almost want to go back to like breaking down all the platforms into the smaller pieces. And that's the approach we're taking here for a few reasons. One, you know, budgets are tighter than ever. It's a lot easier to say, I want to spend $200K on 8 platforms and I'm going to roll them out one by one as I piece together how the technology is going to support our strategy. So that's easier to navigate just in the time of more scrutiny than ever budget-wise. But I also I'm still a huge fan of all of those vendors, 6 Sense, Demandbase. Like all of them are amazing. Their content's amazing. Their tools are amazing. I've been very successful with them in the past. But there's something about taking back some more control under the hood and piecing together these smaller tools that's really appealing. There's a lot of those hot takes on LinkedIn I'm seeing that kind of help validate where we're heading. I have never demoed so many marketing technologies as I have in the past 6 months because there's just so many up and coming players that are leaning into that interest from marketers to go back to specific tools for specific needs versus an all-in-one platform. Because I think the all-in-one platform is great for a lot of reasons, but you end up with a lot of black box feeling of like, I don't really know how this works. And as operators, that makes us generally quite uncomfortable. We want to be able to understand everything that's happening and why it's giving the output it's giving. And I think some of those bigger platforms took that power away from us. And then we ended up getting questions we couldn't answer, which we are typically very uncomfortable with, of like, I don't know why this account is saying it's in market. Like, I can't quite tell you why, but I just know the platform says it is. I think that became a problem of trust between sales and marketing as well. And I think that's why I'm interested in going back to the smaller tools with a bigger scope across all of them. And I think we will continue to see more of that in the market.
Yeah, I'm so there with you. And for all the same reasons, we're literally just now in the process of moving from called a bigger legacy ABM platform to Mad Kudu, which some people know about already.
Yeah, they're great. I've done their podcast before. I haven't used the product, but heard great things.
Night and day in terms of the experience of like, hey, there's just feels like there's more access to more knobs under the hood that you can tune to get to a place. Whereas, with a bigger platform, like a bigger company as well, more established, you just hit a wall. It's like, no, we can't do that. And it's like, maybe it'll be on the roadmap in a year, maybe it won't, but it's like, there is nothing you can do.
And now thinking about the evolution, it just makes so much sense, right? Like we got overwhelmed with all the tiny tools we had and tried to like synthesize them. So then these platforms came in and sort of did it for us. We're like, okay, great. We needed that. And then we started to understand or have more questions. And now that we all have better resource teams and have a better understanding of operations in general, now we're ready to be like, I want more control. Like, it's almost like I wish some of those platforms I could break up of like, okay, thank you for your model. Unlock it for me. So like I can now mess with it. And you just can't. So, and I'm sure in 10 or 15 years, hopefully when I'm getting to the end of this ride, we're probably going to go back to like the full scale all-in-one solution for this stuff as well. I think it's just natural.
The way you articulated that, it's interesting that I've been feeling the same thing. Think about your team. Great article that you wrote that I read that I've alluded to before about like, how do you build out a team? Like what's the first, second, third, 10th person that you should hire? Without retracing all those steps, maybe let's just talk about how do you think about what are the holes that you need to fill and how do you plug people in at different stages?
I would say it almost always platform ops first. At the end of the day, marketing operations is in charge of systems, whether it's 2 systems or 12 or more. So you have to have platform operations. And typically, like if I'm building a brand new team and I have the option, like that's the first part. Like I'm getting on the phone with like my most trusted platform ops people in the space of like, hey, you want to come do this? Like I need someone to like keep the lights on and start thinking about like, what did we inherit here? What needs optimized? What's working? What's not? So like platform operations is still just like bread and butter. And platform operations can typically cover campaign operations in the short term or at a small scale. So that role is always number one for me. From there, it's that data and strategy role has kind of risen to the top as like, also would like to hire that at the same time, but if not, like second. And then campaign operations at scale, like whether that's bringing in someone full time if warranted or outsourcing to a consultant, like, and then getting campaign operations off the plate of platform operations. And then from there, my next favorite role to bring in is general operations, project management, just like that right-hand person to like help synthesize, like building templates for project management, not actually project managing everything across marketing, just keeping the team super organized, being the go-to partner for finance and procurement, for other project management roles within the organization. So like those are kind of the handful that I'm always like, if I'm going somewhere new and they want me to build a team, I'm like, great, I need these 3, 4, 5 roles very quickly. Which ones can I hire immediately? Like those are where I think about like the most important priorities.
And speaking about priorities, and we're in Q4 of the calendar year, at least in my company, we're thinking about 2025 right now. What does that cadence look like for you? Or what sort of cadence do you try to drive in terms of like the business plan, the marketing operations plan? How does that latter work?
We're finishing up Q3. We're on a delayed start, so Feb 1 start. So we're about to hit Q4. So we're right in the middle of modeling and forecasting for next fiscal. And not that marketing is driving that overall process. That's definitely like a revenue finance process, but we have to work their numbers into our process. So we're kind of right now waiting, like, what are those final targets? And then how do we do our tops down model? And then we're going to do our bottoms up model and figure out like, what is that gap between what they say they need from us and then what our budget can actually provide based on our historicals. So that we're right in the middle of that. And someone on my team is responsible for the marketing share of that. So I try to stay really close to that. Specific to my current organization, we're on the verge of some like really big launches coming up next month. So that's like going to kick off Q4 for us. And it's all about planning for next year. So doing marketing leadership offsites and then team offsites and looking at our roadmap. What did we actually get done? What do we need to reconfigure based on all the tech that we've brought in the past 6 months? Like what's reasonable to continue to try to prioritize over next year? And then doing that listening tour with all of the other marketing teams and leaders of like, what are your priorities for next year? Because your priorities end up becoming my priorities, whether they're on my list right now or not. So it's really just like an active listening time of like, what are you guys thinking about doing next year? And they may not even realize they're going to ask us to do something, but we will start to kind of pencil them in based on what they're going to be doing.
You took the words listening tour out of my mouth. How much of your roadmap would you say is like internal MOPS driven? Like we need to do, I don't know, tech debt or a platform implementation. How much is like emerging out of the needs of those other teams and stakeholders?
Yeah. When I think about my roadmap, it's typically, what do we have to do? Because other teams are going to need us to do it. And like, we will hold up their strategy if we aren't planning for it. So what do we have to do that's outside of our wish list? And then what do we need to do to keep our team and systems and processes healthy and scaled? You know, it could be tech debt, could be, you know, partnering across the org on page layouts, whatever it is. So what do we need to do that's marketing ops driven would be the second bucket. And then I always try to keep a little bit of space for what do we want to do? What are those cool projects that are going to make us feel joyful and productive and effective that also provide value to the organization that no one is going to ask us to do? It's not a, we have to do this or something's going to break if we don't. It's what do we want to do that's going to be valuable for our learning experience that still provides value? And that percentage is always variable depending on what those first two percentages take up. But I try to think about it in those three buckets. I try to think about cleaning up the roadmap quarterly, but looking at it monthly of like, okay, what is actually still happening this month versus what's completely changed because of whatever scenario. And like, do we move it out a month? Do we put it in the parking lot? Can we pull it forward because something else is being held up? So yeah, right in the middle of thinking about that for next year. And we'll probably have a bunch of stuff that we have to kick to next year because it just, those want to do's or need to do's for our team just didn't get done. And like, sometimes it's good when things don't get done because then by the time you get to them, it's like, is this still actually a priority? Is this still actually something we even want to do based on what we know now? And if it's not, that's okay. So roadmap is like a loose term for me. It's more of just what are the big rocks that we like and that we don't like that still have to get done.
I love the idea of integrating some like me time into the road. I mean, it's not unimportant and there are often things that do have sort of a atmospheric benefit in the sense that like it uplifts everything, creates a better working environment. So
like one of my roadmap to-dos that is due this month has been marketing ops team culture. Been here for 6 months. 3 months in, it was kind of like the team was settling in. Some of the team was new, some of the team was existing. And I'm like, our team Slack channel is just a bunch of like alerts from the Airtable that we have tickets. Like, we got to get the vibes up. Like, we got to have some fun. So, you know, it's just simple stuff. Like, that's on my roadmap to like improve marketing ops team culture to the level in which I think it should be at. And that's just, okay, we're going to have a holiday party. We're going to do a Secret Santa. We're going to do the meme Olympics next month. I assigned every day of the week to someone on the marketing ops team to like put a prompt in the Slack channel of any kind. You know, yesterday was Would You Rather Wednesday. Today I asked everyone, like, what's your favorite food taste wise that smells terrible? Like, just really silly things, but I'm like, it's important to me and I'm putting it on the roadmap because I'm going to hold myself accountable to like getting this done for the team. So anything can go on the roadmap.
I love it. I think that is the last question we have time for, but really grateful for you being on the show, sharing some of the wisdom you've gained. Just super interesting perspective, I think, for folks that are like, I'm a senior manager, I'm a director, but I want to know, like, what does that next sort of mountain look like? I think you've given a really clear picture of that and a lot of guidance. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, I want to invite you over to the RevOps FM Substack community, where you can sign up to get rough transcripts, show notes, longer form articles, and other bonus content. Just head over to revops.fm/subscribe to get free access. I'd also love to know what you thought of the episode and to hear suggestions for topics you want to learn about. Feel free to leave a comment on Substack or send me an email at justin@revops.fm. Thanks for listening.